welcome to the next section of the course. I'm super excited about this section because in this section, we're going to start talking about React hooks. This is one of React's most modern, most powerful, and perhaps most famous features. And what React hooks represent is a new way to build our components. Now, the good news is React hooks are not going to be completely new because we've explored the foundational ideas behind React hooks before. We actually started this course by creating functional components in React, and then we transitioned to class components. Well, now we're going to make a full circle and return to functional components. And let me tell you more about why. What are React hooks? Well, React hooks are functions from the React library that allow us to hook into existing React features. And when I talk about existing React features, I really mean existing React features that existed in class components. So hooks are an attempt to give us the same type of functionality that we have in class-based React components, but using functions instead. So what is an example of a React feature? Well, one thing is state management, right? State is data that changes over time, and we saw in our class components that we created that with this.state. And of course, one of the advantages of changing state is that it forces a component re-render. And you may recall that when we were using functional components at the beginning of the course, and those functional components just returned JSX, we never talked about how we can incorporate an idea like state management or data changing over time in a functional component. We just had the most bare bones components possible, and they just returned JSX. But with hooks, we can get the same types of React features, such as state management, but now they're going to be able to live and exist in React function components. So again, React hooks allow us to use the features of class components within functional components using functions from the React library. And those functions are called hooks. One big advantage of hooks is this practice tends to simplify and reduce the total amount of component code that we have to write. We can accomplish the same logic as with a class-based React component, but typically with a lot less lines of code. So React hooks were introduced in React 16.8, which came out in February 2019. So it's no longer like the new kid on the block, but it is still what I would say is the most modern and recommended way to build new React components. So React continues to support class components. They're not going to be deprecated or removed anytime soon, but it's clear that the React team wants developers to move in the direction of hooks. And the advice I usually give to people, because they get confused about, well, which one should I use? The answer is, if you are in a new code base, or if you are building a new component from scratch in a code base that is on React 16.8 or later, it is typically recommended to use hooks in functional components over class components if you're able to accomplish the same functionality. There are still some very rare cases where there are things that you can only do in class components, but those tend to be very rare. For most common problems that you're dealing with in front end and in the React ecosystem, hooks and function components can solve all the exact same problems as class components, but with a lot less code. And with all that said, that doesn't mean that you have to update or upgrade all of your old class components to be functional components with hooks either, right? Because that old code will continue to exist and it's not at risk of being deprecated anytime soon. So many teams who have a React code base that is, for example, 5 years old, will probably have a combination of both. If you're writing a new component, well, then you should use hooks. If you're using an old component and let's say your ticket is just modifying some little bit of it and that component is 1,000 lines long, it doesn't mean you have to refactor that component into being a hooks-based component. So hopefully that distinction makes sense. It's not like you should rush to remove all class components. They still hold value and they can still continue to function and do exactly what they're supposed to do. With that said, moving forward, the React team always recommends starting with a function component and using hooks if you can. All right. So in this section, we're going to learn about the use state hook. This is perhaps the most popular, most widely used hook. And what it allows us to do is to store state in functional components. As a reminder, state represents data that changes over time. And this is going to work exactly like this.state works in class components. It's going to work the exact same way even including the fact that when a piece of state changes, React will automatically re-render the component and the associated JSX. But now we're going to see how we can use these hooks in line within our React functional components, right? So what we're going to do to learn about this and to observe the evolution of the React library over time is we're going to refactor our existing user form from using a class-based React component to a function component. And I think this is the best way to learn hooks for several reasons. One is you're going to actually see the progress of how React change over time. Two, you're going to get a better understanding of hooks in general and how they work. And three, you're also going to get an understanding of how you migrate an existing class component to a new hooks-based functional component, right? Because I think this is an idea that you can totally teach in isolation, but I also think it works better and is more memorable if you understand the equivalent functionality that it is replacing from class components. Definitely a lot of fun to learn and teach as well. All right, so with that, I will see you in the next lesson.